Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and wherever you're joining us from in the world today, a very warm welcome on behalf of all the partners and supporters involved in the Forum for the Future of Agriculture's month of March, and in particular to today's Policy Week seminars. My name's Mark Titterington, and together with my colleague Charlotte Smith, we'll be guiding you through today's proceedings looking at the European Union's Farm to Fork strategy and, of course, the ongoing reform of the Common Agriculture Policy, and asking the question how these two approaches can help to renew and strengthen the food and agriculture system, both in Europe and indeed around the world. You'll also have the opportunity to join our partners and supporters in our exhibition space on our virtual platform. They await you there with a wealth of experience and expertise, insights and ideas on the role that they believe they can play in helping to transform the food and agriculture system in Europe and indeed globally. This being the forum, of course, there's the opportunity to network and connect with each other in our networking space, again, on our virtual platform, and we encourage you to do so. But let's get into the main substance of today's program, and I can't think of a better place to start than with our first speaker. He needs very little introduction and is, of course, the former European Commissioner for the Environment and Research, a co-chair of the International Resources Panel convened by the United Nations, and chairman of the RISE Foundation. But perhaps most importantly, in the context of today's meeting, he is the chairman of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. It's always a terrific pleasure to have him with us and a great honor to introduce you to our chairman, Janusz Potočnik.
Hello, Mark, and greetings from Brussels. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm really pleased to launch the Forum for the Future of Agriculture 2021 Policy Week. It makes perfect sense to start FFA Policy Week discussing the Farm to Fork strategy, an implementation document of European Green Deal in the area of food systems. Farm to Fork strategy sets out ambitious goals to make our food system environmentally friendly, where biodiversity can thrive, while maintaining high food standards for our European citizens. Although the vision is certainly there, it is important also to look into the targets being set out more carefully and how they impact the stakeholders of the food value chain. Starting with farmers, it appears that there are a lot of important conditions that they have to reach. Was that the right way to go? I think it was. We actually do not have any other choice if we are sincere with the vision and ambition committed to in the European Green Deal. A new growth strategy for Europe that acknowledges that environmental and economic goals are not in contradiction, and our future economic development depends on how we preserve and protect our natural capital. It is a credible vision and a brave political response to many challenges we are facing. And food system transformation should be part of the solution, an important part due to the fact that it is a very resource-intensive economic ecosystem. Is there the same clear and legally binding ambition for other stakeholders in the food value chain, such as food and beverage processors and supermarket chains? No. Is that correct? The answer is likely the same. They are and should be an important part of the solution and thus an active partner in contributing to solutions. I'm really glad seeing many of them with us today, which I also see as their readiness to contribute to the solutions needed. And consumers, eating less meat, throwing nothing away, living with the seasons, these are only a few of the steps that a living planet demands of them. But they are a bit confused. While we are asking them to behave in a more responsible way, the signals we are sending them are different. They have to pay more if they want to eat more healthy food produced in a more sustainably environmental way. Actually, all the food would need to be healthy and produced in that way. Affordability of food is central. Food vulnerability was exposed beyond average in the COVID period, but also the importance of healthier food produced in a more sustainable way is equally important. Where do I see the problem? Let me explain that with a quote from European Commission's annual Sustainable Growth Strategy 2020. I'm quoting, in the aftermath of the economic and financial crisis, meaning from 2008 on, inequalities in income and access to basic services have grown within the member states, end of quote. Real GDP growth rates in the previous decade have been all the years, but in one positive. So I'm asking you, what is the purpose of economic growth if inequalities within member states are increasing? And is this really a way to improve the well-being of European citizens and specifically also access to food in particular? It would be much more difficult to make food affordable if we do not give more attention also to income and wealth distribution. And it will be difficult to find a solution for sustainability aspect without a full cost approach that includes the full costs of the rapid depletion of natural capital. And we need both, without any doubt. So, farm to fork ambition is clear. The demands and conditions, including all stakeholders, could be improved. But what about tools and instruments? Are they fit for purpose? You know that I'm talking about common agricultural policy, and I know that the special session is today devoted to the CAP. So just one observation. One cannot talk about the strategy which farm to fork is, and it is a good one, without asking itself about the means of implementation. Even with all best efforts from the current Commission to improve the CAP proposal, it is clear that one can hardly find the necessary consistency among ambition, goals, and the main funding instrument. This will inevitably create unnecessary tensions on all the interest sides. Basically, the 21-27 CAP would need to be an instrument entirely devoted to the transition designed by European Green Deal and farm to fork. But as it stands, one can hardly see that. There is still some time to fix it, at least partially. I often ask myself why some strategies do work while others do not. And this often leads me to the questions related to the governance. I know from my own experience that the difficult reality for policymakers responsible for the environment is that we have the responsibility for problems, while the tools for solving them are not ours. We depend for effective solutions on other colleagues in the Commission or member states' governments. The success of environmental policy depends to a large extent on the understanding and willingness of colleagues to listen and associate their voices with environmental policy. In particular, the success of those policies depends on colleagues with responsibilities for areas with high environmental impacts: climate change, biodiversity, health, and pollution. Agriculture belongs among those with high environmental impacts. But on the other hand, their understanding and willingness also depends on environmental policymakers to be well organized, cooperative, thoughtful, and ready to provide sincere help. And we cannot forget the importance of financial aspects either. So good policy, it's a two-way street. Only by bringing at the table together those in charge of solving the problems with those responsible for creating the pressures and in need for change can we develop effective joint vision, joint targets, joint policy pathways, and also a joint responsibility for the success of the needed transition. More than a decade ago, we achieved this governance step in the climate and energy-related transition. By bringing the climate and energy people together, they were forced to design an effective climate response as well as an effective energy sector transition. Something similar would be probably useful and needed also when it comes to the transition related to the food system. Dear friends, farm to fork strategy will be hard to achieve without correcting the market signals and income distribution and improving the governance through working together. The essence of resource management approach is the idea of better understanding the drivers of impacts. Through analysis of material flows, we can trace wanted or unwanted impacts back through their causal chains to their drivers in economic and human behavior. Food system and land management remains at the core of so much of what we are trying to achieve. It is there where the nexus of food, biodiversity, climate, and pollution health so often come together. The task ahead is complex and demanding, but by joining forces, by listening to each other, and by establishing a necessary trust, all is possible. The only way to deliver is if we all converge and work on the same goal. That means not just asking others to do it, but for each of us to be part of it. I look forward to the debate and contributions of the distinguished speakers of the panel. I hope that we can build on the dialogue that will be made during this FFA 2021 Policy Week and refine our policies to foster a real food system renewal, both in Europe and also around the world. Thank you for your attention.
Yanis, thank you very much indeed for that insightful tour through the policy landscape that is impacting on the renewal and transformation of the food system. You talked a lot about the different pieces of the jigsaw, if you like, and how they might come together. I wonder if I might push you, though, a little bit further. You talked about the stakeholders that are involved. How confident are you, Yanis, that all stakeholders, including consumers, understand the pressures that are on the food system today and the extent to which and willingness that they have to rise to the challenge and take some of the action that will be necessary to deliver on the food system's renewal?
The understanding that the world is changing and that the necessity of the transition is unavoidable, I think it's improving among all. And also the consumers are part of that transition in mind, if I can say so. But there are two essential conditions. One is that the signals to the consumers would need to change, because with that signals and with the fact that markets are basically the element which is designing our response, it will be hard to go in that direction. But the other part of the solution would need to be connected with the fact that the consumers would be better informed. So through the digitalization, which is now going on, I think we have an enormous and good opportunity that this could be reached. I know that in the Commission, for example, they are working currently on the product passport, and something like product passports in the food-related products would definitely be an important contribution, so that the consumers would be better informed and that their decisions would be based on real knowledge and real understanding of what matters for the agriculture, for environment, and of course also for their quality of lives.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much indeed, Yanis, for those opening thoughts and insights, which I think have done a great job in stimulating our discussion this morning on the Farm to Fork strategy, and indeed this afternoon with the discussion that we'll have on the Common Agriculture Policy. Of course, lots more to come from you in the remainder of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture's month of March. We look forward to hearing from you again shortly. But for now, thank you very much indeed, Yanis. And with that, I shall pass over to Charlotte Smith to introduce and lead us through the rest of this morning's discussion on the Farm to Fork strategy. Charlotte.
Hello and welcome to this panel discussion on the Farm to Fork strategy, building a sustainable EU system framework and sharing responsibility equally. Now, I am a TV and radio presenter here in the UK, and so you will understand just how hard it is for me to say the following words. Today is not about me. And although we have really impressive speakers and a brilliant panel, it's not just about them either. Today is also about you. We do want you to get involved. So please start asking questions. All you have to do is scroll down, sort of beneath me, and you will see a form. Just add your name, your organisation, if that's relevant, and your question. If you could keep your questions short and to the point, we will be eternally grateful. And if you want to ask a question of a particular member of the panel, then just make that clear. You can also ask a question using Twitter. You just need the hashtag FFA2021, hashtag FFA2021. And please use that hashtag just to let people know that you are here. My kids tell me that if it's not on social media, then it hasn't actually happened. So please let us know that we are indeed real. Now, let's hear from our first speaker today. Claire Berry is Deputy Director General for Health and Food Safety at the European Commission. She's a visiting professor at the College of Europe in Bruges, but more to the point today, she is an expert in the Farm to Fork strategy. Claire, thank you so much indeed for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, and good morning to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today during this policy week of the 2021 Forum for the Future of Agriculture. I think the topic that we're discussing today, as Yanis has already said, is particularly timely as the COVID-19 pandemic that we're still facing shows just why and how much we need to build a sustainable EU food system, and that we need to do this together. I'd like to say a few words about the aims of the EU's Farm to Fork strategy, highlight some of the actions, and then talk about the economic dimension of sustainable food systems. So first of all, what is the Farm to Fork strategy all about, and what is its aims? I think the pandemic has shown to everybody something that the agriculture and food sector knows too well, which is recognized by the EU treaty, which is that food security is of the utmost importance. It must be defended in times of plenty to be sure it can serve us in times of famine and difficulties. The COVID-19 pandemic has also made us acutely aware of the interrelations between our health, ecosystems, supply chains, consumption patterns, and dare I say it, planetary boundaries. This pandemic has therefore clearly revealed the need to urgently transform our food system and make it sustainable, as no food system can be resilient to future disruptions if it's not sustainable. So the Farm to Fork strategy addresses precisely this need. It aims to create a fair, healthy and environmentally friendly food system that will safeguard food security and safety. I'd like to start by mentioning two overarching actions, which are, I think, emblematic of what the EU wants to achieve. The first is that the Commission has started to work on developing a contingency plan for ensuring food supply and food security to put in place at times of risk. In addition to risk assessments and management measures to be activated during the crisis, the plan will set up a food crisis response mechanism coordinated by the Commission and involving Member States. It will be comprised of various sectors: agriculture, fisheries, food safety, workforce, health and transport issues, depending on the nature of the crisis. The second overarching action, which the Commission has already started working, is what we call the Framework on Sustainable Food Systems. This framework legislation, which the Commission committed to adopt by 2023, should mark a paradigm shift, and its role and importance can be compared with the role and importance of the General Food Law Regulation when it was adopted back in its time in the 1980s. The framework legislation will lay down common definitions and general principles for a sustainable food system. It'll address the responsibilities of all actors in the food system and allow operators to benefit from sustainable practices and progressively raise sustainability standards. The Commission's aware of the particular importance of stakeholder consultation. This was mentioned by Yanis in his introduction, and we're particularly aware of the need for consultation with this work if it's to really be the paradigm shift that we're hoping for. And we will start with that during this year, notably with the production and publication for feedback of what we call the Inception Impact Assessment, which will set out the objectives and the main planks of the framework strategy. Now, the Farm to Fork strategy takes an integrated food system approach. This is one of its novelties. It looks all the way along the food chain, and this requires a collective effort through the engagement of all actors in the food chain. This means that next to actions aimed at putting our primary producers on a sustainable path, we've also foreseen actions on the fork side. So one of the first deliverables in this respect will be what we call the EU Code of Conduct for Responsible Business and Marketing Practice that should be ready by June of this year. The code, which will be accompanied by a monitoring framework, is currently being developed in close cooperation with the relevant stakeholders. Through the code, we want voluntary commitments from actors in the middle of the chain to take specific actions on health and sustainability. The focus will be in particular on reformulating food products in line with guidelines for healthy diets, reducing the environmental footprint and energy consumption, adapting marketing and advertising strategies to take account of the most vulnerable, and ensuring that food price campaigns don't undermine citizens' perception of the value of food. And of course, last but by no means least, reducing packaging in line with the new Circular Economy Action Plan. This code should contribute to the creation of a favourable food environment that makes it easier for consumers to choose sustainable diets. This will not only benefit their health and quality of life, but it should also reduce health-related costs for society. We see that people pay increasing attention to environmental, health, social, and ethical issues and seek value in food more than ever before. Even as societies become more urbanized, they want to feel closer to their food. They want what's fresh, less processed, and sustainably resourced. And the calls for supply chains which are shorter have, of course, intensified during the current COVID-19 outbreak. We think that consumers should be empowered to choose sustainable food, and all actors in the food chain should see this as their responsibility and opportunity. So the specific actions in this respect will be of a legislative and non-legislative nature. To facilitate the shift to healthier diets, the Commission will set up what we call nutrient profiles to restrict the promotion via nutrient or health claims of foods which are high in fat, sugars, and salt. This will incentivize food manufacturers to reformulate their products. Yannis mentioned the product passports that the Commission's working on. He talks about product passports for food. So I want to mention in that context the fact that we've also said we'll propose harmonise mandatory front of pack nutrition labelling and consider to propose the extension of mandatory origin or provenance indications on certain products. The preparatory work for these initiatives has been launched already in December 2020. We're now in the course of gathering feedback, and in 2021, all the interested parties will be further consulted, and in particular, the food business operators, consumers, and the member states, with a view to proposal on front of pack labelling in 2022. So finally now, I would like to raise the economic dimension of a sustainable food system. The Farm to Fork strategy aims to reward primary producers and other actors who've already undergone or will undergo the transition to sustainable practices, enabling the transition for others and creating additional opportunities for their business. The Commission is fully aware of the economic impact of the pandemic on the food system and the difficulties that that is posing. This is why the Farm to Fork strategy, as a core part of the European Green Deal, will also support the economic recovery and protect the livelihood of all economic operators. In fact, the Commission is sincerely convinced that the transition to sustainability is not a threat for the food sector, but can be turned into a huge economic opportunity that will allow EU producers to make sustainability their trademark. We do not, however, underestimate the short-term potential impact on some parts of the farming sector, and for this reason, the transition will be accompanied by the EU with several tools. Financially, the new Common Agricultural Policy will provide member states with the means to reward and compensate the sustainable choice of farmers. The Parliament and Council have agreed to allocate €387 billion to the new Common Agricultural Policy over the next 7 years. These funds will help farmers rise to the challenges of the Green Deal, and they will be essential to implement the Farm to Fork strategy. The new CAP will also propose schemes to reward farmers for good environmental practices. The agri-environmental measures under rural development will also mean direct rewards for farmers that adopt sustainable agricultural practices. This should, we think, help to keep farmers at the centre of the transformation, giving them the means and the assistance they need to make changes. In December 2020, in the context of the drafting of the CAP national strategic plans, the Commission addressed recommendations to Member States to ensure not only the achievement of CAP objectives, but also compliance with the Green Deal ambitions and the Farm to Fork targets in pesticides, antimicrobials, nutrients, and organic farming. The Member States are hard to set explicit national values for those targets, taking into account their specific situations. Farmers will also be developed by other means and helped, of course, by research and innovation, with 9 billion devoted to food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and the environment. We hope through work that's going on, better access to digitization through the extension of fast broadband internet to all rural areas, therefore allowing the use of precision agriculture techniques. I'd like to finish by saying once again that the goals of the Farm to Fork strategy cannot be achieved without an integrated approach, and therefore without an active engagement from every actor in the food system. As Yannis Potoknek said, we all need to work on this together. We need to make the Farm to Fork a success for the sake of our environment, for the well-being of our citizens, and for the survival of our planet. Thank you for your attention.
Claire, thank you very much indeed for that. An awful lot to think about. If you have a question, don't just shout it, write it down. You can either tweet it, FFA2021 is our hashtag, or put it on the form, which is sort of beneath me. I am, though, going to take moderator's privilege and ask the obvious question first to you, Claire. As you pointed out, we are in the middle of a global pandemic. Life is very difficult for many people and for many companies. Why adopt this strategy now?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you. Of course, as I said in my words there, of course, the Commission is very much aware of the difficulties and the challenges faced by the food sector. And we've been working very hard to mitigate those impacts and to take the necessary actions to stimulate the economic recovery. But at the same time, I think there was no time to wait, really, for starting to put in place this new resilient food system for three reasons. First of all, the link with the Green Deal, because as is clear now, the global food system is one of the biggest drivers of destruction of the natural world. So there was the urgency to act to make our food systems more sustainable. And at the time of the Farm to Fork strategy, the Commission adopted also the biodiversity strategy, showing the complementarity between those two pieces of work. Secondly, the adoption of the Farm to Fork strategy in May 2020 reflects the appropriate sequencing with the CAP post 2020. I mentioned the strategic plans, the national strategic plans, and member states have to consider the objectives and the targets of the strategy in those plans. So we needed really to adopt the strategy in enough time for us to be able to work with the member states to see how to include the sustainability objectives for the food systems in their national strategic plans. And thirdly, I think we also need actors in the food chain to take these objectives and targets into consideration when making their decisions for investments and factor them into their long-term investment plans. So with the Farm to Fork strategy, it's the beginning of a process which started in May 2020 and which, in accordance with the objectives we will set, will now go forward to 2030. But I think basically we had no time to lose, and a resilient food system is even more necessary during a pandemic than not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And Claire will be joining our panel in just a moment. But what happens in the EU does now, of course, impact its neighbours and trading partners, as some of us are beginning to realise. So I'm delighted that we can now welcome the Minister for Agrarian Policy and Food from the Ukraine, Roman Lyshenko.
Colleagues, it's a big pleasure for me to be on this panel discussion about Farm to Fork strategy. And I want to tell a couple words about Ukraine as one of the world's leading agriculture countries that strongly supports the desire for environmentally friendly production and development of sustainable food system. Ukraine government announced its intention to join to the European Green Deal as early at the beginning of 2020. One of the key points of the European Green Deal in the agriculture is the Farm to Fork strategy. By 2030, this strategy includes the following points, like reduction of the use of heavy pesticides by 50%, reductions of antibiotics by 50%, increase of organic production up to 25%, and reduction of fertilizers used by 20%. For Ukraine, the implementation of the mentioned strategy is a certain boost as well as motivation not to stop in the process of European integration and to modernize their requirements set by European Green Deal. Today, Ukrainian food strategy and food safety legislation is largely in line with the European requirements. In fact, we have to pass the latest draft laws with regards to the food safety, which are already prepared for the second reading. Ukraine fully supports European Union position on decrease of pesticides used for preventing plant disease up to 50%, except by European Union countries. Today, we do not use such intensive approach in the use of the mineral fertilizers and crop protection in contrast to European Union agriculture producer. Our experts and scientific institution estimate that Ukraine has already met the European Union targets for preventing plant disease by 2030. Next step to achieve the goals of the European Green Deal are following for us. Firstly is the reduction of mineral fertilization use in Ukraine. The share of nitrogen fertilizer use is 40 kilograms hectare, while European farmers use more than 80 kilograms per hectare. If we extrapolate the European Commission requirements for 20% reduction, our goal is 68 kilograms per hectare. In other words, Ukraine has even a reserve in this plan. Reduction of use antimicrobial in animal breeding and agriculture. Today, Ukraine is at a low level of antibiotic use, and we will try to preserve and maintain this success. Already yesterday, the President signed the law 3318 on veterinary medicine and animal welfare, which will enable the implementation of European Union requirements for the control of the use of antimicrobials. And as a Minister of Agriculture, I support all this position and we work according to this point. Another moment is all about focusing on the organic production. Today, the total amount of land with organic status in Ukraine is close to 468,000 hectares. It's more than 1% of total area. Of course, an increase in the figure to the Green Deal target of 25% is very ambitious. However, Ukraine is already a leader in supply of organic product to the European countries, and we have ambitious goals to be in such kind of target for 25% in 10 years. And last but not least, I would like to emphasize that the Ukraine agriculture has a huge potential, and Ukraine, one of the leading IT countries, is focusing on prudent management of agriculture production, and our growers can use the latest technologies. And even under condition of much lower access to finance support, we are ready to work together and be together with European Union to achieve the green goals of climate neutrality and open up the direction to the European Union's sustainable food system. And for me, today is very important to be in the part of such kind of meeting in this communication, because we understand how it's important together with European Union to execute this very ambitious Green Deal program that we fixed together for 10 years. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much, Minister. It's really interesting to hear just how important all this is, both within and without the European community. Thank you very much. Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. Let me introduce you to them. First, we have Jeroen Kandel. He is an assistant professor in food and agriculture policy at arguably the best agricultural university in the world, Wageningen in the Netherlands. We're delighted also to be joined by Florence Jonte. She is managing director of the One Planet Business for Biodiversity Coalition. Also joining us today, Samuel Massé, who is president of CIGA, that's the European Council of Young Farmers. He is a wine grower in southern France. And Marco Piarni is director of public affairs at Euroconsumers, which is a multinational consumer rights organisation. And Claire Berry from the European Commission also joins us. Panel, thank you all very much for being with us today. Jerome, can I start with you? We have heard one word a lot this morning already, and that word is sustainability. I always feel there's a danger with this word, that it can mean pretty much whatever you want it to mean. How do we pin down that word so it is useful in achieving change?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's a key challenge. So And at the same time, I think we should not be afraid of a little bit of ambiguity. I think if you want to make deals at the European level, you sometimes need a little bit of vagueness to be able to foster consensus. I think the key challenge is in how to avoid this vagueness from becoming a lack of prioritization. And I think the challenge is really to start from the challenges that confront our food system. And so if we look at our European or global food system and the pressures it puts on planetary boundaries, climate emissions, nitrogen emissions, loss of biodiversity, soil fertility, but also the social foundation of the food system. I think about the labor conditions in the food chain. And we've seen the conditions in slaughterhouses. We've seen the use of illegal migrants in the agricultural sector in Europe. So I think the key challenge is just really to translate this global notion of food system sustainability into concrete targets addressing both the planetary boundaries of our food system as well as the social foundation that we I think need to also respect.
Thank you. Florence, could I turn to you? Your coalition represents some very big businesses. Sometimes big corporations are accused of talking very well about these sorts of initiatives, but not actually doing an awful lot. What do your One Planet for Business Biodiversity Coalition make of this strategy?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Great question, and indeed, always a challenging one. Thanks for asking. What this coalition is about innovating across the food industry from farm to fork on the way we operate together in a pre-competitive setup to transform our supply chain. And what is new is about business leadership about it, clear commitments that are taken by the different companies, and transparency on the progress which are going to be made on this commitment over time. Concretely, it is about thinking and executing action on spreading regenerative agriculture, It's about bringing more biodiversity very concretely in our portfolio, either from different varieties or different species of the varieties we have. And it's about nurturing what is quite often forgotten and restoring the agrobiodiversity into the fields. And this will go by working through the supply chain of the big food companies on changing their specification of what they are requesting to drive a different upstream and then get into the field with different reality for the farmers.
Well, let's hear from a farmer. Samuel, how enthusiastic are European young farmers about operating together to transform the food chain?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your question. So I could easily answer your question by saying yes. I'm pretty confident and optimistic of achieving climate neutrality by 2050 in Europe. But also because we totally welcome the ambition of the Green Deal with the Farm to Fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy. And if I can take one important element on the Farm to Fork strategy is the objective of empowering consumers in making informed food choices, which is really important in terms of trust. But now, if we look more in detail, the objectives set out in the strategy, we are missing, I believe, several aspects which are nonetheless important. First of all, in both strategies, the generation renewal is totally missing while we are going through the biggest social crisis in agriculture in Europe with less than 6% of young farmers under 35 years old. And at the same time, we will be the generation to enable these objectives to be achieved in 2050. Also, unfortunately, we also identify potential trade-off and constraint. For example, when we speak about achieving at least 25% of agricultural area under organic farming by 2030, also 50% reduction targets on the use of the risk of chemical pesticide. So this said, what makes the European agriculture so singular is into account at the beginning of the construction of a strategy. So we have to take into account the economic, social, and environmental constraints, as well as the potential trade-off that is necessary here. Also, ensuring a level playing field of acknowledging that there is no one-size-fits-all solution are also crucial. And at the same time, it is essential to increase and secure farmers' income, with taking into account that such objectives as also to be market-driven in a sense, and that's been cited already. So to make the strategy a success and make sure that the ambition set out is ambitious enough, the first priority is to involve farmers and consumers in a more in-depth dialogue to proceed with a reality checkout on the strategy.
Thank you. Let's move to consumers. Marco, do consumers actually have the power in all this? And how much, if we're honest, do they know or care about where and how their food comes from?
Well, consumers have the power, but they are part of a bigger picture. As Claire said before, we need an integrated approach, and I plead for that. So, in a survey that BEUC published in 2020, we found out that 2/3 of consumers are willing to change the way they eat and adopt a more sustainable food habit, which is a good element to start this discussion. On the other hand, consumers face also hurdles to implement this change. So we have an issue with prices, we have an issue with lack of knowledge, we have unclear information. So we need to work on regulation, food production, retail, all the elements that altogether should make possible that a healthy and sustainable choice become the easy choice for consumers. So we are ready to, I believe consumers are ready to play this role, to enact this change. But on the other hand, it would be a sort of not serious approach to put everything on the shoulder of the last element of the market. We need to empower consumers to do that. And then in doing that, we need to change some part of the ecosystem of the food supply.
Claire, we've just heard quite a lot of challenges for you there, just in one question to the panel. You've got to inspire people to go into farming in the first place. You've got to empower consumers. Does this strategy, how can one strategy do all of the things that have been mentioned?
So indeed, it has to do a lot of things, but I think I would go back to what I said in the opening words, which is that the innovation of this strategy is that it covers the whole of the food chain and it covers the whole of the food system. So we're not looking at the issues in isolation, we're looking at all of them together. Obviously, we need to have separate actions in relation to the different parts of the food chain, but by looking at them all together, hopefully we will be able to achieve what's been said. I take what Samuel said as being very valid, of course, which is that we do need to be able to attract people to go into this industry. We need to make it an industry that will also give them a satisfactory revenue, and that's one of the things that we've said in the Farm to Fork strategy, which is it needs to be a viable option, and there needs to be a reasonable income for those who go into it. I note what he said about the need to promote a stronger dialogue between farmers and consumers, so that there's a better understanding of the challenges that farmers have, and also that will hopefully, as Marco has been saying, there is already a great willingness, I would say, and awareness on the part of consumers, but through a dialogue like that, we may be able to nudge them even further towards having better diets and being able to get the right balance in eating more vegetables and more legumes and more seeds and nuts and so on, and eating less meat and getting the balance right. But I think that the answer really lies in the fact that this is an integrated strategy which covers the whole food system.
Thank you very much. Right, let's take some of your questions. If you would like to ask a question, simply fill out the form, which is sort of below me, or use our hashtag, which is FFA2021 on Twitter. I'm delighted to say that we've got quite a lot of questions already. I will apologise in advance for mangling some of your names. Let's start with a question from Patrick Redsma from Wageningen, actually, University. Currently, many farmers are struggling as the focus on remaining economically viable causes a decline in the provision of public goods. So, Florence, if I can put this to you, they ask, how can trade be made more sustainable?
I think here, when we are talking about working differently from farm to fork, is about redistribution of the value of what we are doing and thinking differently the evolution of the portfolio and bring back the farmers at the center of our discussions. Trade, as any of the player, has a role to play, and we expect through the coming framework to be able to work differently together and by reinventing the supply chain, revisit the value allocation along the chain. And this is what the consumer are expecting as well. So it's about redeploying the existing value, reallocating the values, including the subsidies, by the way, most likely towards the target of today for a better world of tomorrow, that we will make sure that the farmers get a better P&L. Going into regenerative practices, for instance, what is at the core is the P&L and a better P&L for the farms.
Samuel.
So it's the full chain, actually.
I'm sorry. Samuel, do you recognize that as a reality yet?
Actually, if I get back to your question, I think if we look at the food chain currently and about what is going on, and also about trade, because I think it was your question. Yeah. So now what we see is that we need a balanced trade policy which prevents EU product from unfair competition most of the time. What we see, and that's the kind of because we look at higher standards currently on a global scale, and that's why we need to ensure at the same time a level playing field for farmers going this way. Can you hear me well? Because I don't know if you can. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
And,
I know it feels like you're talking
perfect.
to nobody, but we are all here.
Okay. Okay, and I don't know if I answer your question, but that's the kind of thing that we are looking for right now, to be also taking more into account in the whole process of making the price, because sometimes when we are referring about farmers, I mean, I can give you more example about that later, but we see sometimes that we are at the end of the price, and we are the variable of adjustment most of the time.
Jeroen, farmers here in the UK have a saying that they can't go green if they are financially in the red. And I think that's probably what Samuel was referring to there. So when we're talking about trade being more sustainable, how does that work?
Well, I think the elephant in the room is overproduction, especially for some agriculture commodities. I think the challenge that we face, also that the agricultural sector faces, is how to move from a almost exclusive focus on bulk production to a focus on the production of high quality, sustainable, nutritious foods. And I think there's already many initiatives going on, but there are still major steps to be taken. And also, if we look at public support, we see that Common Agricultural Policy still primarily supports the status quo. It doesn't foster transition yet. So if we talk about support to farmers, I think we can do much more at European level, but also at national levels to support farmers in making this transition.
We're going to talk more about the reform of the CAP later on today, so do please join us for that session. Marco, if I can ask you the role of consumers here. Consumers are very price savvy, and they will usually buy the cheapest, wherever it comes from.
Yes, and that's what I meant before, that when I say that we should not expect to put everything on the shoulder of consumers. We need to change the system. So I see here also, hearing the comments before, that we should make a sort of alliance from the two sides of this market, farmers on one side and consumer on the other. Not that the other part should not be part of the deal, but I believe this is important. We have a big common agricultural policy. If we want to make changes, we have to change the incentives there in order to direct the production on sustainable food production. And of course, price is the first barrier to empower consumer in sustainable choices. As a matter of fact, we are in the middle of a pandemic crisis. Now we are in the middle of a sanitary crisis, but the economic crisis is there as well. So of course, price it's an issue. So just to summarize, I believe we need to change the incentives on the to produce sustainable food. We need also to harmonize this with the trade policy, because we cannot just rule on what we do in Europe and not and then accept everything comes from somewhere else. And on the other hand, we need to allow consumer to have affordable prices for sustainable choice. So there is the willingness of consumer to go in that direction, but price cannot be an obstacle. Here we have an issue to democratize the sustainable choice. And we believe that as long as sustainable choice remain a choice for an elite, we will not change the system. So I believe here I would like to bring the word of all consumers, not just the little number of consumers that already today can make that choice. And first thing is, and last thing is, in some part we need also to come with regulation. For example, we need to ban some advertisement on food, junk food to young consumers. That is something that we have to tackle with regulation.
Claire, an awful lot in all that, but fundamentally, how does farm to fork mesh with trade policy?
Well, that is one thing that we've been working on very intensely with our colleagues that deal with trade. I mean, there is a trade policy review going on at the moment, and we have been insisting that the sustainability of the food system should be brought into that. We're also in our negotiations with third countries, in bilateral negotiations with third countries, including a chapter on sustainable food systems, in which we discuss with them and which we cooperate with them on the different areas, be it from the pesticides to animal welfare, to food waste. I mean, across the board, we are intending to engage with third countries on that. But there is one other aspect that I wanted to mention, which is this question of the level playing field, which came up, which I think Samuel mentioned and others hinted at as well. Because I think that we can't have a situation where within Europe, our farmers are making huge efforts to be more green, to be more sustainable, and yet that doesn't have an impact in terms of the imports that are coming in. So, I mean, where we have, for example, a situation where neonicotinoids, which are very harmful for bees, have been banned within Europe, then we will also draw the consequences of that in terms of what will come in by way of imports from third countries. So that will mean that what we call the maximum residue levels that may be left of those pesticides, that products will not be allowed into the EU if the maximum residue level is not at zero, if a product has been banned within the EU. So it's very much integrated into the farm to fork strategy. There's a whole chapter about the way that we want to build green alliances. It was very interesting to hear from the Ukrainian minister there, because we've been looking at which countries really have the same objectives as us and want to go in the same directions. So there really is active diplomacy going on alongside the strategy. So it's not just internal, it's very much external, and our trade policy is taken into account in that as well.
Claire, I just want to pick up something with you that has been asked actually by quite a lot of people with us today. Farm to fork is a strategy and not legally binding. So how will the EU ensure that the targets are met and then integrated within the CAP?
So the targets are indeed aspirational targets. It may well be that some of them become mandatory targets. For example, one that we're looking at the moment is the pesticides target, because we're reviewing the Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive. So in that context, meanwhile, it's one of the options that's being considered is to make the pesticides target binding. It's a mix of legislative and non-legislative measures in the whole strategy. Some things we're trying to do through the Code of Conduct, as I mentioned already, but then others, we have this framework legislation on sustainable food systems, which will be, we hope, will make a really paradigm change in the way that we approach food systems. So I think there is, there's a blend between what's legally binding and what's not legally binding. Some of the things we want to try and get done more quickly, because obviously having a piece of legislation takes longer to come into force. And if we want to achieve all the objectives by 2030, then we need to have this mix of voluntary measures and regulation, I think.
Jeroen, do these voluntary codes work? Are they effective?
Well, I tend to be pessimistic. And this is my biggest fear. So I see the ambition of the European Commission. But I think my fear is that the Farm to Fork strategy remains a toothless tiger. And so if we look at these voluntary standards, for example, well, we've had them in the Netherlands for a long time. And every year the monitoring of our national public health institute shows that it hardly has any impact on the product composition of food processors, of the industry. So I share the ambitions, but I think the key challenge for the Commission is to also convince the Council, the Member States and the Parliament to really translate these ambitions into concrete standards, into concrete objectives, and as well as to implement interventions that work. And I think currently the Farm to Fork strategy too heavily relies on voluntary agreements, on informing consumers, of which we also know, well, it's important, but it's very ineffective in changing consumer behavior. You would really have to intervene at the level of prices in the food environments if you really want to foster a transition. And there, I think the Commission ultimately relies on the member state governments to play their own part. And I'm less optimistic about their ambitions.
Florence, if things aren't mandatory, will companies really, honestly, truly do them, particularly when they have other pressure, particularly from shareholders and trying to make a profit and all the rest of it, at a very difficult time?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the first lever is probably the coherence in the incentives to support the transition. Again, from the different part of the chain, and make sure that whatever is going to happen in this framework, it is completely aligned in terms of incentivizing and resourcing the measure and the control. So we will welcome a real framework. And I think there is activities going on at the moment in the European level, like the product environmental footprint, that will enable to make sure that every part of the chain is incentivized on a coherent manner and the transparency is brought to the consumer. This transparency of the consumer, although it's not going to be the magic recipe, is going to be still a key enabler, because the transformation will be driven, and especially for the businesses, by the demand. And these demands have to be available and affordable, yes, indeed, but it has to be also clear in terms of communication. There is a number of initiatives happening already to give access to the consumer about what is this product, who are behind the product they eat. And the consumer, as it was said, are more and more interested to learn about that. There will be trade-off to make, absolutely, but we need a fair playing field also there to regulate the communication, to get measurement, and to positively support the companies, small or big, who are actually doing the job.
Florence,
I believe in positive stimulation versus punition.
Will, though, Florence, positive stimulation work if we think about difficult things like sugar in food, for instance? limits on that are very difficult for companies. It makes it more expensive to make the food. They're very difficult for consumers who fundamentally like sugar. So without somebody saying you have to do it, and I don't want to be overly cynical, but will companies really do it?
The more advanced companies who are truly having a clear purpose and mission are already in the way to do it. It's about the sustainability of this business. Business are built on trust also, and consumer trust. And doing the right thing at the right moment is very important for de-risking those business for their own sustainability. So I do believe that for many companies, especially in Europe, but not only, where food is part of our culture, where consumers are very much educated about what they eat and the way they should eat, this is still a good way to go. And yes, the company will commit. It's about their future sustainability, and it's about de-risking their business also towards the financial community, with more and more interested on looking at what is the impact of the business overall on nature and people.
Samuel, farmers pretty much respond to being incentivized, or do they pretty much respond to being told it's the law?
Just to answer your question, just getting back also what you asked earlier to the previous speakers, I think for us, we don't want to say that it could be mandatory at the member state level, but not at farm level, which is very important, because what I mentioned earlier, it is very important to take into account that every farm situation is very different. I spoke earlier about diversity, but it's also like diversity of landscape, of kind of production that you have in your own farm, and also the way that you sell your own product. Like I haven't mentioned yet, but I'm a grape grower, and I'm an organic grape grower from the south of France. So we are already facing some challenges from climate change. But you add that to the possibility of sales that you have, if you had the possibility to sell directly to the consumer, and that's everything has to be taken into account. Now, if I go back to your question, and sorry, I think the incentive that you can give to farmers in terms of support, I will say, yeah. I don't know if it was your question.
Well, really, we're looking at the difference between saying this is something we would like you to do, and this is something you have to do, and which is a more effective way of doing it.
No, that's why also, I forgot to mention that, but also what we have to take into account in the farmer view is what already farmers are doing, the practices that already have been implemented for farmers. Because if you ask somebody to do more, if it's already reaching this goal, it's difficult to say, and so how we can measure that tomorrow, it's very hard to say. So I think that's why this will have to be adapted to every farm at the end.
Marco, do you think a voluntary code is effective?
Until now, we don't see the results of that, and we plead to have better commitments and execution. I like the word execution, but on some part we need to have mandatory rules in order to give a clear, strong input in that direction. On the other hand, I believe, and this is a cultural change that we need to pass through. We speak about sustainability, but probably we speak here also about economic sustainability of some player in the market. So this is a cultural change. It's a little bit puzzling me, but I mean, on one side, we see, and I believe if we are going to make a survey again today, probably this is even stronger, a big willingness from consumers to change their habits. So there is the demand on the market. I don't understand why the industry doesn't go directly in that way. So yes, we need the regulation because until now the industry didn't deliver. That's a clear answer. But on the other hand, we need to work on culture and integrated approach, as Claire has said. On the other hand, for what it concerns mandatory, I believe it will be important as a signal and as a means of information. The EU-wide front of pack nutritional label to be implemented soon. And on the other hand, and as a last point, I believe also let's work on a responsible and useful digitization. We can use the digital world to bring this message. We buy more and more online. Let's make possible that consumers in all the kind of platform receive clear information on which is the sustainable choice. Let's agree and try to create this framework. We should work all in the same direction, because at the end, this is also economic sustainability for the players, and is sustainability for our market and our society. So I think we need to run, because we are losing time, and it's not black or white, regulation and self-regulation. We need to change our culture, our approach in this reasoning.
Thanks, Marco. Claire, I just want to give you a chance to briefly come back on some of that, particularly the comment that this might be a toothless tiger.
Yes. Thank you, Jeroen, for reminding us of the reality of the situation. I mean, yes, of course, you're right. We have to persuade the member states, and we have to persuade the European Parliament, of course. And they are sometimes not quite as ambitious as the Commission is. But I'm hopeful on this front that the Parliament will keep up the pressure on the member states. I think that it's very much the question of what we should do through regulation and what we can better do by voluntary measures. I mean, you mentioned you're in the product composition. So we are thinking about doing the nutrient profiles and doing those through legislation, because obviously if there are misleading claims that are made about products, then that's something which has to be dealt with through legislation, I think. So the question is, how do we get the balance right? I mean, in terms of the code itself, we're looking at various aspects. So, I mean, one thing is how you stimulate the healthy and sustainable consumption patterns. And I think that the consumers are fueling the demand to which the retailers respond. I mean, I think it's very difficult in that space to put a piece of legislation and tell consumers what they should be asking for. I mean, I think you have to educate the consumers, empower the consumers, and then get them to react in the right way. I mean, similarly, we're talking about internal processes within companies, the way that they organize themselves, the way that they do their operations. Do we really want to legislate in those spaces? Because it's a very detailed way. I mean, obviously, you can think about having legislation which sets them a key objective. And you may also, of course, want to look very carefully at what they do in their supply chains and have certain legal requirements in relation to the supply chains and what happens there. But, you know, we need to get the balance right. I mean, companies, at the end of the day, have to run their businesses. They have to make money. They have to, and it's not by setting down the details in law. I think it's a bit what Samuel's saying as well. No, it depends on the individual situation and the particular circumstances of the company, whether you're going to be able to get more out of them by nudging them. And I think what Florence said as well, I mean, some of the companies are incredibly responsible in terms of the practices that they put in place and what they do. So, I mean, I would argue that it's not a toothless tiger, because we do have some legislation, and there are certain things that you can't really legislate for to get a result on.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to whip through some of the questions that have been posed to particular members of the panel, but please do keep those questions coming, either right on the form beneath me or use the hashtag, which is FFA2021 on Twitter. Right, so Samuel, this is a question for you. So far, says Nurgis in Lithuania, so far none of the EU measures have been effective in increasing the attractiveness for young people to stay or go into farming. Does Farm to Fork help change this? Samuel.
It's what I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, no, because what we are missing is the income part of farmers. And we have to secure the incomes. And how we will do that, and I can give you one easy example. I think we should share with the rest of the food chain the impact of the transition. And I'm speaking here about the price. For example, that could be an easy solution. Because if I give you my own example, for example, during the transition from organic, it takes like 3 years. But during these 3 years, you are not paid at the organic price, which is most of the time higher than the normal one, I would say, the price. And that should be important to have this kind of possibility to have like a contract that help you to go through this transition moments and to secure the income. So if I go back to this question and what I'm mentioning that, I think young farmers, if they want to get in our sector now, will be facing 5 things. First of all, the possibility to have secure income. Also, the uncertainty. Most of the time, what we see, the laws are changing pretty often, and we don't really know where we are going 1 year to another, which is a reality. And we really hope that this kind of strategy tomorrow could lead to a longer future, to see where we want all to go. So take out this uncertainty. Infrastructure. What we see also pretty often that we are missing infrastructure. You can see that my connection is not that well. I'm in a countryside, and we see that through digitalization, we will need this kind of tools also to be implemented to everywhere, in the most remote places also tomorrow, if tomorrow you want that. And I know that Portugal is trying to do by putting new young farmers in remote areas, in rural areas where you don't have any more activity now. And that's crucial for tomorrow, I think, to maintain activity in rural areas that can only pass through agriculture. Because we are the only industry that cannot be, I don't know we say, but you cannot export your industry, just export your goods, but not what you produce. Also, if you look at the rest, we will need support in terms of transition, and that will be very important. And one very key element, which is missing also in the strategy for me, it's the land access and secure land access. Because we see now with the spreading of cities and stuff like that, we all see that. And that's make the price increase and more pressure every day on access to land. And this is necessary, I think, for a brighter future to get young farmers to get access to this sector, to secure land and also in terms of safe and security for food access in Europe also at the end. That's very necessary, I believe.
Thanks, Samuel. I'm just going to whip through and go to these particularly targeted questions, but rest of the panel, if you do want to say something, just wave and I will probably notice you. So let's move to you, Marco. This is a question from Juan Alvarez at the European Commission. Are consumers ready to pay for the environmental service provided by farmers that are now being required by Farm to Fork?
I would reorganize this question because I don't think this is the way through. We need to make the sustainable choice for consumer the easiest and the most affordable one. Until when we consider that only, let's say by brackets, rich consumer can behave in a sustainable way, we will not win this battle. So we need to create the critical mass and bring as many consumers as possible to make the good choice. This is a good choice for consumers themselves, and it's a good choice for the market. So we need to build the market of the future. And as we say before, it has already been said, if we make a macro analysis, we need to guarantee that there is an integration with the subsidies in the common agricultural policy in order to pay back the producer that go in that direction. We need to create the retailers incentive to go in that direction. And we need to use also other players in the market. We always complain about how our choices are sometimes directed in the digital world. Let's direct the choice in the good direction. Let's make the choice, the affordable choice, the sustainable choice, the more easy one, also with digital tools. Consumers need to have this kind of information. So I am sorry, I didn't answer your question. I am against. We need to make the price affordable. Instead, we are speaking about nothing here.
Right. So, Jerome, how does that work then? If consumers, I'm taking, they're probably not that keen to pay any more for food, how is this going to work? Jerome.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is to really change the pricing structures. So to make the healthy, the sustainable choice also the most affordable choice. And I think in the end, food pricing, it's a result of political choices. It's the functioning of the market and the prices that we pay. They are not a pre-given. Politicians, policymakers can steer the outcomes of the food system. And if I may, I actually raised my hand because I wanted to ask a question to Florence about this this discussion about regulation that we had before. Can I, or?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the challenges in making a success of the farm to fork strategy is also because it's also the position of companies. And I have come to know Danone as a relatively progressive company in terms of promoting healthier outcomes. But even Danone has, in the run-up to the farm to fork strategy, lobbied against a proposed ban of the Commission on the added sugars in baby foods, together with other companies. So I'm wondering, how do you reconcile these positions? Because I see many ambitions of companies, but then if I look at the actual actions, there seems to be a discrepancy between the two.
Florence.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here in my position of OP2B and not Danone, so you will understand that I'm not answering a Danone specific topic. Although I want to come back on two things here, which are related. I think the big elephant in the room here is the finance and the financing of the transition and the way we allocate money. Companies are doing the best they can with their purpose, their brands, but they are also submitted to a certain level of pressure to deliver for the financial community, which is what the shareholders are expecting every year. So here, I think what we are talking is probably this will not change tomorrow, but probably it's time to try to truly make visible the true cost of food and have next to the traditional financial P&L of the companies, what is the cost of the impact on the environment, wide sense of it. We can introduce the nutrition aspect, we can introduce the nature aspect, and we can introduce the people aspect. And having a framework which starts to value this impact and compare companies based not only on their financial profitable level, but also on their impact societal level, will change the discussion and the chase for the consumer. And the ability of different stakeholders in the chain to reallocate incentive or to reallocate pocket of money in the decision maker. So we are back to what I think is great in this farm to fork is a systemic change that need to be addressed and not finger pointing any of the players in between, because we will succeed or we will fail altogether to bring affordable, sustainable product to the consumer that will create sustainable companies that will enable sustainable farming.
Florence, if that doesn't happen, if the impact, the natural capital, all of that isn't really included properly, then is this actually going to be nigh on nearly impossible for some food companies to do what we might see as the right thing, because actually it's expensive and consumers won't pay for it?
It will be, I think the company, for the reason that we discussed before, will do it because there is a true consumer demand. So step by step is going to come. The question is, do we have the time and the resilience to go at the pace we are going today, managing always very difficult trade-off? Or do we want to accelerate? And then that's where we need to think differently. Incentives, we need to think differently the way we work and reallocate the money across the chain and get farmers, traders, manufacturers, consumers in the same kind of understanding.
Marco.
And education.
Yeah, I want to go back on, because I don't want to be misunderstood on my comment before. Here we really need to work together. So consumer need to receive clear signal, correct signal on the price of sustainable food. And I believe there is a strong willingness for consumer to go in that direction. So I didn't say consumer will not pay. I want to say that today, the signal that receive consumer are misleading, because consumer receive signal of very low price of junky food, which has in itself a price that does not correspond to the cost of society, on our society, on our market.
Thank you. I'm going to move on because we have quite a few questions to get through and we're getting towards the end. But if you are burning to ask a question, do it, and frankly, do it now. Right, let's move to a question that actually lots of people have asked in slightly different ways. So Claire, I'm going to aim this one at you. Given the ambitious requirements of lowering pesticide use in farm to fork, how will farmers be able to maintain production and income levels?
Well, I think, first of all, in terms of lowering pesticide use, the Commission has not just said we have to lower pesticide use, we've also said, and we have to make alternatives available on the market. So that's what the Commission is doing in terms of modifying the system and trying to encourage other possibilities through biological control agents, through other types of pesticides, alternative pesticides. So we can't simply say to the farmers, okay, this is your job to change and to not use these pesticides anymore. We have to make sure that there are alternatives which are available on the market. And those alternatives, in the same way that everybody's been talking about, farmers getting a fair deal in terms of the products that they sell and so on, those alternatives have to be available at a reasonable price. So we are looking at the systems under which we approve alternative products and seeing if we can make them available more quickly, if we can reduce the amount of data that we need to have to do them and so on. So, I mean, this needs to be, the systems need to work in parallel. We can't simply dump the responsibility on the farmers. So we are working on alternatives at the same time, I would say, yeah.
Samuel, are you confident that you will maintain production and income levels?
Well, just to be clear for myself, because I'm already an organic farmer. When you switch to organic farming, you lose between 20 and 30% of your yield there. That's quite a normal average. And it depends of how after that you maintain your, or you can increase a little bit, but it depends how you work. Now, getting back to your question, I think what is very important if you want all to reach this goal, because at the end, what I mentioned at the beginning, as young farmers, we agree since the beginning to go this way. Yeah? I think we all have to go collectively in this way, because we see the need on the risk of biodiversity and environmental in general. So how we can do that and reach this goal? I can cite you like three things. First of all, like research, and I would say innovation, I think is very important. If I also give you one example, and mine, in the wine sector, we see now that we have new varieties coming, varieties that they can help us to reduce the use of pesticide. But the problem is that we also have a climate change crisis, but these varieties are not adapted to a warmer climate. And so how do we do? Because at the same time, when you plant a vine, you have 25 years old or 30 or sometimes 100 years in front of you. So you already have to take care of this at the beginning that you set up a vine, And also, do the consumer will be like this kind of wine, That's also something that we have to take into account, because that's the three kind of things that we are thinking right now. After that, also knowledge and skills. That's the kind of things that we need. Now you have new machinery, so you have to have new knowledge to use this kind of machinery. Not only the farmers, also the workers that we have on the fields, It's very necessary to have like and at the end, that will be the most important to reach this goal, is to have investment support. to help us to go this way, yeah, because we cannot otherwise. So I don't know if I answer your question, but that's a little bit the way that I will address your point.
Do you think your CEJA members, who perhaps are more reliant on inputs than you are nervous about this change and about the impact it may have on both their yields and of course, therefore, how much money they're making?
It depends what kind of products you are producing. I have the luxury of producing wine, which is not a goods that everybody has to consume every day to feed itself, And so that's why you address differently the way that you are producing cereals, milk, or any kind of other product than luxury product that I'm doing, I would say. And that's why it depends of what kind of market you are addressing to. So that's why reducing something which is all, because we don't use pesticide because we want to use pesticide, just to be clear, and also fertilizers. It's also because it's the only way today to reach the goal that we are setting up between, I will say, the industry and the price that we are setting up right now, And how we can change that, I have no idea currently. How we can reduce that and change that, because now I can, and you can see that every day. I mean, I think we have the best approach currently with all the technology with us to reduce our use of pesticide. And I don't think that we use more that we can use. And it's the same for fertilizer. So reducing of 50% something which is already very low, I don't know how. And if it's just in terms of reaching some goals by member states, it's a different approach, I will say. But at the farm level, it will depend of the kind of products that you will produce, and also the kind of products that you are producing, and the goal of the kind of market that you are looking for at the end. I don't know if I'm very clear, but it's a little bit depending of what kind of market you are looking for also.
No, it's clear. It's clear that it's complicated. Jerome, did you want to come in on this one?
Well, I think I fully agree with Claire. I think it's not so difficult to put a ban on pesticides, and I think from science we also agree that it's necessary to reduce the amount of chemical inputs into the system. But the question is, do you have the alternatives in place to mitigate for the loss of these means? And if we look at current investments in innovation, we've seen that over time investments in chemical inputs have been much larger than investments in organic alternatives or in integrated pest management means. So there's still a lot of work to be done in science, within companies, to develop these alternatives. And I think that will really be the key challenge for the next 10 years or so.
Okay, let's move on. This is a question for you, Florence, from Denai Stissel from the ELO. What do you believe are the key commitments that processors and retailers should take on board to help consumers make better choices?
I think it is on the transparency on the communication, for which we need probably a regulated framework, actually, coming back to previous discussion, to get full transparency on where the product comes from and what is environmental impact, nutritional impact, communication, to rebuild trust, because I think it's a topic that we haven't really also touched, but there is a trust challenge on the consumer side as well. And this will have to be addressed and rebuilt through communication, transparency, and making sure that it's controlled, because the worst is misleading communication.
Briefly, Marco, would you agree?
Well, I would agree that we need to clarify the signal on prices that go to the consumer. So again, sorry to repeat, before I had also a problem on connection, but when junk food is very low price and has a lot of cost for society, this is something that we all together have to stop here today if we want to build something consistent in this strategy for the future. This is, we pay little, but we want to stop paying this as a consumer. And the society has to decide together that this is not consistent with the policy that we want to build. So this is giving the clear signal of consumer means also hidden cost. Hidden cost on junk food are very huge, and the cost, the price for consumer is very low. This is not acceptable and has to be stopped today.
Okay, let's move on very quickly to a question for you, Jeroen, from Igor Kos, the Institute for the Circular Economy. Should we not maximize production at the local level? It would help the local economy and minimize carbon footprint of food production and logistics.
So I assume that this refers to initiatives targeting short food chains. Am I right? Or
yes, I think so. Yes, and also
growing
locally for the local population.
Yeah, I think there are many arguments in favor of shortening food chains, raising awareness, teaching consumers, citizens where their food comes from. At the same time, of course, we cannot feed our growing cities just through these short food chains in its entirety. Yeah? So yes, I think there is much to be gained by investing in urban-rural connections, in shortening food chains. But I think apart from that, there is still a major challenge in also making large-scale farming, which we see in many parts of Europe, more sustainable and helping farmers to make that transition. So I think it's not either or, but it's and.
Okay, let's move to one of the questions which was asked actually almost as we started this session. Is it not now necessary to make a new impact assessment on the Green Deal and Farm to Fork to face the worst economic and social crisis that Europe and the world have had in the recent past? Claire, have you been rethinking this at all in light of where we are?
Of course. I mean, as I said at the beginning, we are very acutely aware of the impact that that the crisis has had on food companies, and we've been working to mitigate the impact of that. In relation to Farm to Fork as such, we will have impact assessments for each of the legislative proposals as is normal. So if we do have, for example, mandatory targets on pesticides, then we will have to justify that with a fully fledged impact assessment. So, and the assessment may be slightly different now than it would have been a year ago. Yes, I mean, we have to factor that in. It's part of the work that we do in terms of looking at, the winners and losers of whatever we put on the table in that respect. But I would also, because there's sort of inherent in this question is the idea that we should now do a different calculation about what we do on the Green Deal and what we do about Farm to Fork. But I'll go back to, I think, what I said earlier, which is I think that the situation that we're in now means having a sustainable food system is even more important than it was before. If we look at the impact that, the food system is having on our planet, the way that we live, it shows that even more so than ever before do we need to do what we promised to do in the Farm to Fork strategy. Yeah?
Can I put the same question just to the rest of the panel, but if your answers could be succinct, that would be fantastic. Florence, do you think there needs to be a slightly new look at the impact of this from a food company point of view?
I think from a company perspective, I will come back on the incentives and make sure that there is coherence on the incentives that are going to be reallocated or given from farm to fork. And that's what would be, for me, the most important.
Samuel.
Yeah, and also I can add the possibility to diversify our way of income through this kind of strategy, like carbon sequestration, agritourism, production of energy. That could be also a way of supporting farmers of the way of we can approaching and securize our income.
Marco.
I'm quite. I want to finish with very positive and optimistic remark. We have the demand. We have innovation and technology. We are a society that can discuss, as we have done today, among each other with different responsible of different sectors. We need to bring about the future. And this is a big challenge. This about food sustainability is one of the biggest and important challenge for Europe for the next, I would say, decade.
Thank you. Jeroen.
Well, listen, nowadays our lives are dominated by COVID and its economic impacts. But I think what we discussed today, the climate crisis, the increase of food-related disease, those are a way larger crisis, slumbering crisis on the longer term. So I think the Farm to Fork strategy and translating the Farm to Fork strategy's ambitions into concrete actions is key to address these slumbering crises.
Thank you all very much indeed. Panel, I really appreciate your time today for such a fascinating and wide-ranging discussion. Thank you very much indeed. I wish we could give you a round of applause, but imagine it virtually. Thank you very much. Thank you too for all your questions. Do join us for the session on the Common Agriculture Policy later today. But now I am delighted to say that to close off this session, we can welcome the Minister of Agriculture for Portugal. Portuguese, of course, do have the presidency at the moment. Please welcome Maria dos Céu Antunes. Thank you, Minister, very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me being here with you. And I want to start to say that I speak in Portuguese now, and I have a translator to me. It's more easier to communicate with you in my natural language. Thank you for that. Quero começar por agradecer o convite para estar presente neste 14º Fórum sobre o Futuro da Agricultura e também pela oportunidade de apresentar as prioridades de Portugal enquanto presidência do Conselho da Europa.
So, very good morning to you. I'd like to start by thanking you for this invitation to be here in this 14th Forum on Agriculture, and for the opportunity of submitting to you the priorities of Portugal and its work in the presidency of the European Council.
Portugal assume a presidência do Conselho da União Europeia num momento particularmente sensível da nossa história coletiva. A pandemia da Covid-19 causou uma disrupção sem precedentes a nível global e testou e continua a testar a nossa capacidade de adaptação e resiliência.
Portugal takes on the presidency of the Council of the European Union at a very delicate moment of our collective history. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused an unprecedented disruption globally and has tested and continues to test our responsiveness, our adaptation and resilience.
A pandemia veio colocar fortes entraves não só à maneira como produzimos, mas também à forma como chegamos aos consumidores.
The COVID-19 pandemic has placed very serious constraints, not only on the way whereby we produce food, but also on the way in which we reach out to the consumers.
E a primeira nota que quero deixar é para o setor agrícola e agroalimentar, que pela sua capacidade de continuar a trabalhar, pela forma como se conseguiu ajustar de forma tão rápida, permitindo que os alimentos não parassem de chegar às nossas mesas.
So my first note is for the agricultural and the agri-food sector, which, because of its capacity to continue to work, the way in which it was able to adjust very quickly, has enabled food to never stop reaching our tables.
E por isso a presidência portuguesa traçou 3 grandes prioridades. Primeiro, a promoção da recuperação europeia, que deu uma resposta forte aos efeitos económicos provocados por esta pandemia, mas que seja alavancada pelas transições climática e digital.
So in light of this, the Portuguese presidency has set out 3 main priorities. The first one, to promote an European recovery, which will give a strong response to the economic impact caused by the pandemic and which will be leveraged by the climatic and digital transition.
Em segundo lugar, a concretização do pilar social da União Europeia como elemento essencial para assegurar uma transição climática e digital justa e inclusiva.
And secondly, to put in place the social pillar of the European Union as a key element to ensure a climatic and digital transition that will be fair and inclusive.
E a terceira prioridade, o reforçar a autonomia estratégica da Europa, aberta ao mundo, para garantir uma capacidade de resposta a novas crises como esta que atravessamos.
Thirdly, to reinforce the strategic autonomy of an Europe which will be open to the world in order to ensure the responsiveness to new crises such as the one that we are currently going through.
Por sua vez, as prioridades para a agricultura, que se inserem essencialmente nas linhas de ação que querem promover uma Europa resiliente e uma Europa verde, define 4 prioridades.
In turn, agriculture has set the following priorities as part of the lines of action which seek to promote a resilient and a green Europe. And as a consequence of this, 4 main priorities have been set out.
A primeira, a reforma da política agrícola comum para uma agricultura mais verde e mais resiliente.
The first one being the reform of the common agricultural policy in order to obtain a greener and more resilient agriculture.
Segunda, o desenvolvimento rural para reforçar o papel da agricultura no combate ao abandono dos territórios, desenvolvendo práticas mais sustentáveis e biológicas.
The second priority is rural development in order to reinforce the role of agriculture in combating land abandonment, developing sustainable and organic farming practices.
A terceira, a segurança alimentar, como forma de reforçar a suficiência alimentar europeia, de mãos dadas com o bem-estar animal e a sanidade vegetal.
Thirdly, food security, reinforcing the European food sufficiency together with animal welfare and food and plant health.
Por último, a inovação, a aposta na transição digital do setor agroalimentar para promover o uso mais eficiente dos recursos.
Fourthly, innovation, investing in the digital transition of the food sector, promoting a more efficient use of available resources.
E por isso, queremos valorizar o contributo da estratégia do prado ao prato, em particular nas áreas da segurança alimentar, do bem-estar e saúde animal e da sanidade vegetal, procurando reforçar as medidas de proteção fitossanitária substitutivas ou complementares à luta química.
So we wish to enhance the contribution of the Farm to Fork strategy, particularly in terms of food safety, animal welfare and health, and plant protection, whereby we wish to reinforce measures of plant protection that will replace or complement chemical control.
A adoção da estratégia do prado ao prato, que está no centro do Pacto Ecológico Europeu, quer tornar o sistema alimentar europeu sustentável, ambicionando para objetivos de produção e segurança alimentar dos objetivos da sustentabilidade.
The adoption of the Farm to Fork strategy, which lies at the heart of the European Ecological Pact, seeks to make the food system in the European Union sustainable, thereby bringing closer the objectives of food production and food security with the objectives of sustainability.
E queremos dar especial atenção ao reforço da suficiência alimentar e à sustentabilidade das cadeias de abastecimento que tanto têm sido testadas durante esta pandemia.
We will pay special attention to reinforcing food sufficiency and the sustainability of supply chains, which have been so severely tested during the pandemic.
Daremos especial prioridade à inovação, à transferência do conhecimento e à digitalização do setor agroalimentar, por forma a podermos produzir mais com menos, rentabilizando de forma mais eficaz os nossos recursos, em particular o solo e a água.
We will give priority to innovation to the transfer of knowledge and to the digitization of the agri-food sector in order to produce more with less, making the most of our resources in the most efficient way, particularly soil and water.
Queremos um setor mais sustentável e resiliente, uma produção de alimentos seguros, nutritivos e acessíveis, a par das melhores práticas ambientais e que possamos, por isso, reforçar o combate ao aquecimento global, de forma a que a Europa seja o primeiro continente a atingir a neutralidade carbónica em 2050.
We want a sector that will be more sustainable and resilient. We want the production of safe, nutritious and affordable food, together with the best environmental practices, reinforcing the struggle against global warming, so that Europe will become the first continent to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050.
E sabemos bem que isto são metas muito ambiciosas, mas contamos com o empenho e a capacidade dos milhões de agricultores europeus que têm tido um papel fundamental no reforço da segurança alimentar, da inovação e da sustentabilidade das cadeias alimentares, que garantem a cerca de 500 milhões de consumidores europeus alimentos seguros, nutritivos e de qualidade.
And in order to achieve these ambitious goals, we count with the commitment and the know-how of millions of European farmers who have played a key role in reinforcing food security, innovation and sustainability of our food chains, ensuring that close to 500 million European consumers have access to safe, nutritious and high-quality foodstuffs.
Esta transição constitui um grande desafio para todo o setor, mas é também uma oportunidade e assim iremos utilizar todos os instrumentos à nossa disposição para criar melhores condições para as empresas inovarem e se adaptarem às grandes tendências.
This transition means a very big challenge that the entire sector must face. But it is also an opportunity, and we will use all the tools at our disposal in order to create better conditions for the companies to innovate and to adapt to these great trends.
E a discussão pública tem-se centrado muito nas metas relacionadas com a redução da dependência dos pesticidas e dos agentes antimicrobianos, com a redução do excesso de fertilização e o aumento da agricultura biológica.
Public discussion has been focused on the goals which are related with the reduction of the dependency on pesticides and antimicrobial agents, the reduction of the excess use of fertilizers and the increase of organic farming.
Mas bem sabemos que a estratégia tem que abordar a produção de alimentos de forma holística ao longo de toda a cadeia até ao consumidor. E nesta transição, os agricultores europeus têm um papel muito relevante, assim como a política agrícola comum, que é um instrumento fundamental para ajudar os agricultores a alcançar padrões de produção mais sustentáveis e para podermos atingir os objetivos da estratégia do prado ao prato.
But this strategy takes on board food production in a holistic way throughout the entire chain until the final consumer. In this transition, European farmers have a relevant role to play, as well as the Common Agricultural Policy, which will be a key instrument to assist the farmers in attaining more sustainable levels of production and to meet the goals of the Farm to Fork strategy.
E é por isso que achamos tão importante podermos concluir a negociação da política agrícola comum, o que requer um calendário muito exigente de discussões, dado que é a nossa intenção obter um acordo entre o Conselho, a Comissão e o Parlamento, durante a primavera, para que seja possível a implementação da política em janeiro de 2023.
So we feel it is of the utmost importance to conclude the negotiations of the Common Agricultural Policy, which means that there is a very tight schedule, inasmuch as it is our intention to reach an agreement between the Council, the Commission and the European Parliament in the spring, so that we can roll out the policy starting in January 2023.
E esta ambição é partilhada pelo Conselho e pela Comissão e pelo Parlamento. As três instituições pretendem ver concluída esta negociação até à primavera deste ano.
This ambition of coming to an agreement on the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy is an ambition which is shared by all three parties involved, the Council, the Commission and the European Parliament. All these institutions wish to achieve an agreement by this spring.
Ainda neste domínio da política agrícola comum, queremos assegurar a resiliência e a capacidade de resposta que temos que ter a crises como esta.
In the scope of the Common Agricultural Policy, we wish to ensure the resilience and the responsiveness which we must have in order to be able to meet and to respond to crises like the one we are living through.
Mas também sabemos que a reforma da PAC é fundamental para a transição ambiental e digital, através da construção de uma arquitetura mais verde, que potencie a ambição climática do setor, que contribua para o desenvolvimento das zonas rurais, mas também para o reforço estrutural do sistema agroalimentar europeu, garantindo a nossa autonomia estratégica.
The reform of the Common Agricultural Policy is crucial for the digital and environmental transition that we aim to achieve by means of building a green architecture which will enhance the climatic ambition of the sector, which will contribute to develop rural areas and also to structurally reinforce the European agri-food system, ensuring our strategic autonomy.
Por isso é tempo de agir. É o nosso statement, porque achamos que é de facto com a ação para uma recuperação económica e social, para podermos continuar a dar resposta aos efeitos desta pandemia, mas também para nos preparar para o futuro, porque queremos agir para uma Europa mais verde, mais justa e mais digital, sem deixar ninguém para trás. Muito obrigada.
So now it's time to deliver. We want to act to bring about an economic and social recovery that will continue to meet the consequences of the pandemic and build a better future. For that, we have to deliver in order to build a fairer, greener and more digital Europe, which will leave more impact. Thank you very much for your attention.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, Minister, and also to all the speakers that we've heard from this morning. Charlotte, I think the strategy has clearly set the importance in terms of the direction that the Farm to Fork strategy is going to take. As also the discussion this morning teased out some of the opportunities, but also some of the challenges and the tensions perhaps that we face, and we'll no doubt pick up those as we go into this afternoon's session. Thank you very much for the great job that you did this morning. Well, that just about brings us to the end of this morning's discussion around the Farm to Fork strategy. I want to thank all the speakers and contributors that we've had that have made it such a rich and stimulating discussion. We hope that you very much enjoyed it as much as we have, and thank you also for the questions that you've been sharing with us. I'd like to encourage you now to head over to the exhibition space where our partners and supporters of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture's month of March are waiting with bated breath to share with you their ideas and insights on how we renew the food and agriculture system in Europe. You'll also have the opportunity there to connect with each other in our networking space, which of course has always been the secret sauce of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. And it's lunchtime here in Europe as well, so if you are so inclined, I'd encourage you to drop by the kitchen as well, where you'll be able to download sustainable recipes, healthy recipes to nourish your stomachs as well as your minds as we go into this afternoon. We'll be back here at 2:30 Central European Time to look at the role, the critical role, no doubt, that the Common Agriculture Policy reform is going to play in implementing many of the elements we've heard from this morning in the Farm to Fork strategy. A very distinguished panel indeed joining us, including European Commissioner for Agriculture, Wojciechowski. Join us then. We look forward to seeing you. Enjoy the lunch break. See you shortly.